Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Told This podcast, the show that takes you on a journey into the heart of history's
Okay.
most captivating events.
Right.
Today we're going deep into a chapter you might not have heard much about,
Okay.
a story as gripping as it is tragic.
Yeah.
The Nanjing Massacre. We're going beyond the headlines and the statistics to uncover the human stories within this dark period of World War II.
What's often lost in the sheer scale of this event is the individual experience.
Right.
We're talking about hundreds of thousands of lives,
Yeah,
each with their own story, their own hopes and fears,
absolutely.
all extinguished in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
It's crucial to understand not just what happened, but how it happened, and what it tells us about human nature under extreme duress.
That's what's so fascinating about these deep dives, right? We get to zoom in on the details that textbooks often gloss over.
Yeah.
So before we delve into the horrors of Nanjing itself,
Sure.
let's set the stage. Can you walk us through the events that led to this horrific event?
Imagine the world in 1937.
Okay.
Japan, fueled by imperial ambitions and a sense of racial superiority, is on the march. They've already invaded Manchuria, and now they've set their sights on the rest of China.
Wow.
After a series of provocations,
Right.
they launch a full-scale invasion,
Right.
quickly overwhelming Chinese defenses.
And this invasion wasn't just about military objectives, was it? There's a chilling undercurrent of dehumanization in the sources I've read.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Japanese propaganda at the time portrayed the Chinese as inferior,
Right.
even subhuman.
Yeah.
This mindset sadly permeated the military ranks and helped fuel the atrocities that followed.
Of course.
On their march toward Nanjing, the Japanese army engaged in what can only be described as a campaign of terror.
Right.
Civilians were strafed from the air,
Wow.
villages were razed, and even killing contests were reported in Japanese newspapers.
Oh, wow.
Almost like sporting events.
It's hard to fathom that such barbarity could be treated so casually.
Yeah.
These killing contests, for example.
Right.
What can you tell us about them?
They were horrifying displays of cruelty,
Yeah.
often involving two Japanese officers competing to see who could behead the most Chinese prisoners.
Wow.
These contests weren't just isolated incidents, they were documented, even celebrated,
Wow.
reflecting a deeply disturbing culture within the Japanese military at the time.
It's as if they were trying to erase the humanity of their victims.
Yeah.
Turning them into mere objects in a twisted game.
And this dehumanization played a key role in paving the way for the horrors that would unfold in Nanjing.
Right.
It's a reminder of how dangerous it is to view any group of people as other, as less than human.
It's a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked hatred and prejudice.
Yeah.
So the Japanese army is advancing on Nanjing,
Right.
leaving a trail of destruction in their wake.
Uh-huh.
What was the situation like within the city as the enemy approached?
Nanjing, then the capital of China, was in a state of chaos.
Right.
The government had fled, leaving the city's defense to a hastily assembled garrison,
Why?
many of whom were untrained conscripts.
Wow.
Adding to the confusion, the retreating Chinese forces employed a scorched earth policy,
Right.
burning buildings and resources in a desperate attempt to slow the Japanese advance.
This scorched earth tactic, while understandable in the face of a relentless enemy, must have created even more suffering for the civilians trapped in the city.
It undoubtedly contributed to the hardship and added to the sense of desperation.
Right.
But it's crucial to emphasize that this tactic in no way justifies the horrific acts that followed.
Right.
The responsibility for the atrocities lies squarely with the Japanese military.
So the Japanese army arrives at the gates of Nanjing in December 1937.
Yeah.
What happened next?
The Chinese, despite their inferior numbers and equipment, put up a fierce defense. But they were ultimately overwhelmed.
Wow.
The city fell on December 12th, and what followed was 6 weeks of unimaginable terror.
But amid the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope, wasn't there? Tell us about John Rabe and the Nanking Safety Zone.
John Rabe, a German businessman,
Right.
and ironically, a member of the Nazi Party, emerged as an unlikely hero.
Wow.
He, along with a small group of Westerners, established the Nanking Safety Zone, a designated area within the city meant to protect civilians from the violence.
It's fascinating how, in the midst of such barbarity, a group of foreigners managed to create this haven of relative peace.
Right.
How did they persuade the Japanese to respect this safety zone?
They leveraged their international connections and the symbolic power of their nationalities, particularly Riggs' German citizenship.
Right.
They marked the zone with Red Cross flags and negotiated tirelessly with the Japanese authorities.
And how many lives do we estimate were saved by this extraordinary effort?
It's difficult to say for certain, but estimates range from 200,000 to 250,000 people. It was a remarkable feat of courage and compassion in the face of overwhelming evil.
It's stories like this that make you realize that even in the darkest of times, human decency can still shine through.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember those who, like Rabe, risked their own lives to save others.
Right.
Their actions offer a glimmer of hope in an otherwise incredibly bleak narrative.
Speaking of hope, sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. In the face of such widespread brutality, did any individual Japanese soldiers defy orders to protect civilians?
While difficult to quantify, there were indeed accounts of individual Japanese soldiers who refused to participate in the atrocities.
Wow.
Even risking their own safety to protect Chinese civilians.
That's amazing.
These acts of conscience, though rare, remind us that even within a system built on violence and dehumanization, individual moral choices can still be made.
Those stories are important to remember as they remind us that humanity can persist even in the most dire of circumstances.
Yeah.
But sadly for many in Nanjing, the reality was far from this glimmer of hope. Before we go further into that darker territory, we have a quick message for our listeners.
Okay.
If you're finding this deep dive as captivating as we are, hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss any future episodes of Tell Me More. We have many more incredible stories waiting to be told.
Right.
Now back to the events unfolding in Nanjing.
While the safety zone offered a fragile sanctuary for some outside its boundaries, a different story was unfolding.
Oh, no.
The Japanese army, under the command of Prince Yasuhiko Asaka, a member of the imperial family, embarked on a campaign of systematic brutality that would shock the world.
It seems there was a deliberate effort to not only conquer Nanjing, but to break its spirit, to inflict terror on a massive scale. Can you elaborate on how this played out in the actions of Japanese troops?
The Japanese launched what they called mopping up operations. But these were essentially organized massacres targeting both captured soldiers and civilians.
Wow.
There's strong evidence that Prince Asaka himself issued an order to kill all captives, giving official sanction to the horrors that followed.
So we're not just talking about random acts of violence, but a coordinated effort to eliminate any potential resistance, even if it meant targeting innocent civilians.
Exactly. And the methods employed were as varied as they were barbaric.
Right.
Mass executions by machine gun and bayonet were common.
Wow.
Prisoners were sometimes used for bayonet practice.
Oh my God.
Beheaded, burned alive, or even buried alive.
It's hard to even process the sheer brutality of it all. Did they make any distinction between soldiers and civilians? How did they determine who was a legitimate target?
That's what's particularly chilling about this massacre. The arbitrary criteria used to identify supposed soldiers among the civilian population. Anyone who looked remotely capable of bearing arms.
Oh, wow.
Even young men, teenagers.
Oh, my.
Or those simply wearing loose-fitting clothing that could conceivably hide weapons. Were deemed targets.
So essentially, any male civilian could be deemed a threat and executed on the spot. That level of suspicion and paranoia must have created a climate of absolute terror within the city.
Imagine the fear, the constant threat of violence hanging over every household. The Japanese army was essentially operating under a presumption of guilt, turning every encounter with a civilian into a potential death sentence.
It's almost as if they were trying to obliterate not just individuals, but the very fabric of society within Nanjing.
And this destruction extended beyond human life. The Japanese engaged in widespread looting and arson, systematically targeting cultural and historical sites, further demonstrating their intent to eradicate any sense of Chinese identity within the city.
What was the rationale behind this destruction of property and cultural heritage? Was it simply opportunistic looting, or something more calculated?
While individual soldiers certainly profited from the looting, there was also a strategic element to it. By destroying homes, businesses, and cultural landmarks. The Japanese aimed to cripple Nanjing's economy and break the spirit of its people.
Wow.
It was a deliberate act of cultural annihilation.
It's heartbreaking to think of the irreplaceable treasures that were lost during this period. But amidst this widespread destruction and despair, Were there any acts of defiance?
Oh.
Any attempts by the people of Nanjing to resist their oppressors?
Despite the overwhelming terror, acts of resistance did occur.
Really?
Individuals and small groups risked their lives to hide refugees.
Wow.
Smuggle food and supplies into the safety zone.
That's amazing.
And even engage in sabotage against Japanese installations.
Wow.
These acts of defiance, though often fleeting and fraught with danger, represent the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to be completely subjugated.
Those stories are crucial to remember as they show that even in the face of unimaginable brutality, the human spirit can still find ways to resist, to hold on to hope.
Yeah.
But as we delve deeper into the events of those 6 weeks, the scale and brutality of the atrocities become even more difficult to comprehend.
Indeed. And the next chapter of our deep dive will focus on the particularly horrific aspect of the Nanjing Massacre: the widespread use of rape as a weapon of war.
Wow.
Yeah. As we delve deeper into the events of those 6 weeks in Nanjing, we encounter a particularly disturbing chapter.
Right.
The widespread use of rape as a weapon of war.
Yeah.
This wasn't simply a case of isolated incidents.
Right.
It was a systematic, calculated strategy of terror employed by the Japanese military.
The sources I've read on this are truly harrowing.
Yeah.
It's hard to grasp the sheer scale and brutality of the sexual violence inflicted upon the women of Nanjing.
The numbers are staggering.
Yeah.
Historians estimate that tens of thousands of women and girls from all walks of life were subjected to sexual assault during the occupation. These weren't just random acts of violence. They were often carried out in public in front of family members as a deliberate tactic to humiliate and terrorize the entire population.
Reading the testimonies of survivors, you get a sense of the profound trauma.
Right.
The lasting scars left by these horrific experiences.
Absolutely. The physical and emotional wounds inflicted during this period have reverberated through generations, impacting families and communities long after the events themselves.
What strikes me is the sheer depravity of the acts described.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about sexual assault. It was about inflicting pain, humiliation, and degradation.
One particularly disturbing aspect was the targeting of pregnant women.
Oh, wow.
There are numerous accounts of women being raped and then bayoneted in the abdomen.
Oh, my.
Their unborn children murdered along with them.
Wow. That's just...
This wasn't just about subjugation. It was about extinguishing any hope for the future, about breaking the spirit of the Chinese people.
It's almost beyond comprehension, the level of cruelty involved.
Yeah.
Did anyone speak out against this violence at the time? Was there any attempt to hold those responsible accountable?
Within the Japanese military, there was a culture of silence and impunity surrounding these crimes.
Of course.
Rape was often seen as a perk of war, a reward for conquering soldiers.
Wow.
But there were individuals outside the military who risked their lives to document and expose these atrocities.
We've already talked about John Rabe and his efforts to protect civilians within the safety zone.
Right.
Did he also document the sexual violence?
Rabe's diaries provide chilling accounts of the rapes he witnessed.
Wow.
And the desperate pleas for help he received from countless women seeking refuge.
Of course.
He, along with other Westerners like Minnie Vautrin, the American missionary who sheltered thousands of women at Ginling College, documented the horrors they saw, keeping meticulous records that would later serve as crucial evidence.
These individuals were true heroes, putting themselves in harm's way to not only provide aid, but to bear witness to the suffering and ensure that the truth would not be forgotten.
And their efforts were crucial in challenging the Japanese government's attempts to downplay or deny the atrocities.
Right.
The evidence they collected helped to expose the scale and brutality of the Nanjing Massacre to the world.
It's a stark reminder of the importance of documentation.
Right.
Of preserving the voices of victims and holding perpetrators accountable.
Yeah.
But even with these firsthand accounts, is it possible to truly grasp the full extent of the suffering, the emotional and psychological toll of these events?
That's one of the greatest challenges when studying historical trauma.
Right.
We can read the accounts, examine the evidence, but fully comprehending the lived experience of those who endured such horrors remains elusive.
It's a humbling reminder of the limits of our understanding, even as we strive to learn from the past.
Yeah.
So as we move on from this particularly difficult aspect of the Nanjing Massacre, what other key themes or events should we explore to gain a more complete understanding of this complex historical event?
While the atrocities themselves are central to understanding the Nanjing Massacre,
Right.
it's equally important to examine the aftermath.
Okay.
The attempts to establish a death toll.
Right.
The pursuit of justice.
Yeah.
And the long shadow this event continues to cast on international relations.
It's a story that goes far beyond those 6 weeks in 1937.
Right.
One that continues to shape our understanding of history and the consequences of unchecked violence.
As we delve into those subsequent chapters, we'll encounter even more complexities, more challenges to our understanding of human nature.
Absolutely.
And the enduring impact of historical trauma.
We've been unpacking the horrors of the Nanjing Massacre, but as you mentioned, the story doesn't end there.
Right.
The aftermath, the quest for justice, the weight of memory.
Yeah.
These are all essential threads in this tapestry.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to unravel those?
One of the most immediate challenges in the aftermath was simply trying to grasp the scale of the tragedy. Establishing a precise death toll has been and continues to be a source of debate and contention.
I can imagine, given the chaos, the deliberate destruction of evidence by the Japanese and the passage of time, piecing together an accurate account must have been incredibly difficult.
Exactly. The figures offered by different sources vary widely, from tens of thousands to upwards of 300,000.
Wow.
The International Military Tribunal for the Far East, held after the war, placed the figure at over 200,000.
Wow.
But even that number is subject to scrutiny.
It's not just about the numbers themselves, though, is it?
Right.
It feels like there's a deeper layer here, something about how different narratives shape our understanding of the past.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Okay.
The Nanjing Massacre has become a highly charged symbol in both China and Japan.
Right.
For China, it represents the brutality of Japanese imperialism and serves as a reminder of past suffering. For some in Japan, acknowledging the full scale of the massacre is seen as damaging to national pride.
Right.
And an attempt to vilify their country.
So the debate over the death toll becomes entangled with issues of national identity and historical memory.
Yeah.
It's not just about facts and figures.
Right.
It's about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are as nations.
Precisely. And that makes it even more important to approach this topic with a commitment to uncovering the truth wherever it leads.
Yeah.
We need to be aware of the different perspectives at play.
Right.
The political agendas that might be shaping those narratives.
It reminds us that history is never truly objective.
Right.
It's always filtered through the lens of interpretation, of memory of the present moment.
Speaking of the present moment, it's impossible to talk about the Nanjing Massacre without acknowledging its impact on international relations, even decades later.
Right.
The trauma of such atrocities lingers in the collective memory of nations, shaping their perceptions of each other, and influencing their interactions on the world stage.
It's like a ripple effect, where the consequences of past actions continue to spread outwards, impacting the present and future.
Exactly. For example, the Nanjing Massacre remains a significant obstacle to full reconciliation between China and Japan.
Of course.
The lack of a sincere and unambiguous apology from Japan, coupled with ongoing historical revisionism by some groups, keeps the wound open and fuels distrust between the two countries.
Are there any specific examples of how this tension manifests in the political arena?
Certainly one clear example is the recurring controversy over visits by Japanese officials to the Yasuhiko shrine.
Okay.
This shrine honors Japan's war dead, including convicted war criminals.
Wow.
For many in China and other Asian countries that suffered under Japanese occupation, these visits are seen as a glorification of Japan's militaristic past and a lack of sensitivity towards the victims of its aggression.
It's understandable why those visits would cause such outrage.
Yeah.
It feels like a profound disrespect for the memory of those who suffered.
Precisely, while some may see these visits as simple acts of remembrance, they are perceived by others as a denial of responsibility and a continuation of the historical injustices of the past. This unresolved tension contributes to a sense of injustice and resentment, hindering the possibility of genuine reconciliation.
So how do we move forward?
Right.
How can nations grappling with such a painful legacy find a path towards healing and understanding?
It's a complex question with no easy answers.
Right.
It requires a multifaceted approach that involves both acknowledging the past and working towards a shared future.
What would that look like in practice?
For Japan, a more sincere and unambiguous acknowledgement of the atrocities committed during the war, including the Nanjing Massacre, is crucial.
Yeah.
This could involve a formal apology,
Right.
the establishment of a dedicated memorial,
Okay.
and continued efforts to educate future generations about the realities of Japan's wartime past.
And what about China's role in this process?
For China, a willingness to engage in open dialogue, to listen to different perspectives and to move beyond a solely victim-centered narrative is important.
Okay.
While remembering the suffering of the past is essential.
Right.
It's equally crucial to create space for understanding, empathy, and ultimately forgiveness.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act, acknowledging the pain of the past while also striving to build a more positive future.
It is, but I believe it's a necessary journey, not just for China and Japan, but for all nations grappling with the legacies of historical injustices.
Right.
The Nanjing Massacre serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when nationalism, militarism, and dehumanization run unchecked. It's a lesson we must never forget and a challenge we must continually strive to overcome.
On that note, as we conclude our deep dive into the Nanjing Massacre, it feels important to leave our listeners with a sense of hope.
Yeah.
A sense that we can learn from the darkness and work toward a brighter future.
Absolutely. While the events we've discussed are undeniably horrific, they also reveal the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
The individuals who risked their lives to protect others, the survivors who shared their stories, and those who continue to fight for justice and remembrance all offer us inspiration.
That's amazing.
They remind us that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, humanity can endure and we can choose to learn from the past and build a better future.
That's a powerful message to carry with us. Thank you for guiding us through this complex and challenging chapter of history.
You're welcome.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic and to share what you've learned with others as we conclude this episode of Tell Me More Stories Told Us podcast. Remember that even in the darkest of times, there are always stories of courage, resilience, and hope. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truth wherever it may lead.